Welcome back to our channel. Today we drift back in time to explore one of the most mesmerizing chapters in human history, the Golden Age of Lisbon, once the richest city on earth. From dazzling palaces to teeming markets, from rivers of gold to the shadows of inequality, we'll uncover what life truly felt like in this extraordinary metropolis. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, share it with fellow history lovers, and subscribe so you never miss a journey into forgotten worlds. Now, let's step into the streets of Lisbon and feel its pulse, its splendor, its chaos, its secrets. There was once a city clinging to the western edge of Europe that seemed to rewrite destiny itself. While other capitals built wealth slowly, through industry or conquest, this city appeared drenched in fortune overnight as if the heavens had poured their treasures directly into its harbor. Ships arrived daily, bellies heavy with unimaginable riches. Churches shimmered as though carved from sunlight itself. Nobles strolled streets where gold had grown so commonplace it ceased to astonish. This was Lisbon, and for a breathtaking era, it reigned as the wealthiest city on the planet. To grasp how Lisbon soared to such heights, one must first understand its place in the world. Portugal was a modest kingdom in size and population, yet it commanded an empire unlike any before, stretching from the lush coasts of Brazil to the trading posts of Africa, from the spice-scented ports of India to distant outposts in Southeast Asia. Portuguese vessels had woven continents together long before rivals grasped the world's true scale. And Lisbon was the blazing heart of it all. Everything flowed through its gates. Everything returned to its shores, perched along the Tagus River with deep natural harbors and open arms to the Atlantic. Lisbon became the ultimate gateway between continents. Its docks swarmed with activity, tall-masted ships crowding the waterfront, their hulls weathered by epic voyages. Sailors, speaking unfamiliar tongues, filled the air with exotic melodies. Salt spray mingled with cinnamon, tobacco, sugar, and rare woods. For travelers arriving by sea, Lisbon felt not like a European port, but the very center of a connected world. Visitors struggled for words. Some called it a new Rome. Others saw echoes of Constantinople's diversity. But these comparisons fell short. Lisbon wasn't merely wealthy, it was defiantly, unapologetically opulent. Gold wasn't hidden away. It was flung across facades and altars as a declaration: we stand above all others. The sheer scale of its prosperity stunned Europe. While capitals like London and Paris grew steadily through trade and craft, Lisbon's riches arrived in tidal waves, overwhelming, intoxicating, transformative. Gold defined everything. It poured in quantities so staggering it reshaped economies across continents. Coins minted in Lisbon circulated through royal courts and merchant stalls from Moscow to Madrid. Portuguese gold financed wars, crowned monarchs, and built empires far beyond Iberia's borders. Europe itself ran on Lisbon's heartbeat, but this wealth was never abstracted, blazed everywhere you looked. Churches wore gold leaf-like skin, their walls glowing from within. Altars glittered under candlelight, transforming sacred spaces into radiant theaters of power. Even humble chapels rivaled royal halls in splendor. To many, Lisbon seemed less a city of stone and mortar and more a metropolis sculpted from liquid light. Its streets embodied beautiful contradiction. Medieval alleyways twisted beneath grand plazas. Elegant carriages rolled past barefoot beggars. On rain-slicked cobblestones, palaces towered over cramped tenements. Lisbon wasn't designed, was lived. Layered, chaotic breathing. Every corner whispered another story of ambition or despair. A city grown rich faster than it could comprehend. Itself, at its summit, stood the Portuguese crown, a monarchy, not merely ruling, but radiating divine mandate. Kings weren't just sovereigns, they were custodians of heaven's bounty. Royal power and sacred authority fused inseparably. Wealth wasn't luck, it was proof of God's blessing. Lisbon's prosperity became destiny fulfilled, a sign Portugal had been chosen to command the seas and harvest Earth's hidden treasures. This conviction shaped everything from soaring cathedrals to whispered court intrigues. Lisbon didn't see itself as fortunate. It saw itself as fated. Yet this city never turned inward. It pulsed with global connection. Merchants from England, Holland, France, and Italy kept permanent homes here. Warehouses bulged with goods from every known horizon. Contracts were sealed in counting houses overlooking the harbor, where news from Brazil, Africa, and Asia shaped decisions within hours. Lisbon thrived on risk, the kind that could crown a trader overnight or leave him ruined by a single storm-tossed voyage. Fortunes rose and fell with the tide, but the promise of unimaginable reward kept souls returning again and again to this city of chance and glory. For ordinary citizens, life in the world's richest city was a study in paradox. Employment flourished, docks demanded laborers, noble households required servants, shipyards and markets buzzed ceaselessly. Money circulated freely, touching even those far from palace walls. Yet inequality carved deep canyons through daily existence. The gulf between rich and poor wasn't hidden, it was paraded daily. Silk-draped aristocrats processed through sacred ceremonies, while the destitute pressed against church gates, hands outstretched for mercy. Wealth didn't erase suffering, it framed it in sharper relief. Lisbon was a city where luxury and desperation shared the same narrow streets, sometimes divided by nothing but a whisper-thin wall. Still, confidence thrummed through its stones. Lisbon believed in its own eternity. It trusted its wealth was boundless, its empire unshakable, its supremacy unquestionable. Few sensed this golden age might be fleeting. Instead, many felt history itself had peaked with Lisbon standing triumphant. At its summit, visitors departed overwhelmed. Some admired its brilliance, others recoiled at its excess, but none ever forgot it. Lisbon made no apologies. It announced its greatness in gilded altars, thunderous processions, and ships groaning with treasure. It was more than a capital, it was proof that a small nation could command the world, if only for a luminous moment. And in its prime, Lisbon stood radiant beneath the Atlantic sun. Nowhere its brightest days were already slipping into memory, far across the ocean. Deep within Brazil's rugged interior lay the true source of Lisbon's impossible wealth. Far from Europe's marble halls and incensed cathedrals, the foundations of a golden empire were carved from earth and agony. Explorers uncovered staggering gold deposits in a region soon named Minas Gerais. What followed became one of humanity's great rushes for fortune. Rivers ran flecked with gold, Hills concealed veins, so rich men could harvest precious metal with bare hands and simple pans. Word ignited like wildfire. Tens of thousands flooded the interior. Portuguese settlers, enslaved Africans, adventurers chasing dreams of sudden riches. Towns erupted from wilderness overnight, fueled by desperation and divine greed. But this gold would not remain in Brazil. The crown moved swiftly to claim its share. A royal fifth of every ounce belonged to the kingdom, forced by armed officials, who weighed, taxed, and guarded every speck of dust. Smuggling thrived, yet even after losses, the sheer volume staggered imagination. Year after year, armored fleets departed Brazil's shores, floating fortresses, crossing the Atlantic toward Lisbon. These weren't merchant vessels. They were mobile treasuries, holds crammed with chests of gold dust, gleaming bars, freshly minted coins, diamonds winking in velvet darkness. Warships escorted them because losing one fleet could shatter a kingdom's economy. When these ships finally sailed up the Tagus, Lisbon held its breath. Bells pealed. Officials gathered in solemn ranks. Cargo was unloaded, underarmed watchgold weighed, recorded, distributed. A portion vanished into royal vaults. The rest flooded banks, merchant houses, private coffers. A single fleet's arrival could inject unimaginable wealth into the city overnight. Money became abundant. Credit expanded like wildfire. Prices swelled. Lisbon experienced both inflation and intoxication, a sense that anything was possible. If a building could be raised, it was. If a surface could be gilded, it was drowned in gold. Churches transformed into monuments of radiant excess. Gold leaf layered so thickly that interiors seemed to dissolve into pure light. Sculptures, altars, vaulted ceilings, every inch shimmered. This style, later called Joanine Baroque, stunned even devout locals who questioned such extravagance. In houses of worship, yet gold flowed beyond sacred spaces. It financed palaces with river views, fountains dancing in sunlit plazas, roads paved for royal processions. Nobles expanded estates. Merchants erected townhouses dripping with ornament. Even religious festivals grew more lavish, funded by that endless stream of Brazilian treasure. Lisbon became a stage where gold performed daily, ever hidden, always. Celebrated that this abundance reshaped souls. Lisbon began comparing itself not to neighboring capitals, but to Rome at its zenith, to ancient empires whispered about in legend. Elites believed they lived in a sacred moment where divine favor and imperial ambition had fused perfectly. Yet this brilliance carried a terrible price, one carefully hidden from Lisbon's glittering streets. In Brazil's mines, gold was torn from earth by enslaved hands. Hundreds of thousands of Africans endured brutality beyond imagining. In riverbeds, collapsing in tunnels, broken by exhaustion and violence, entire communities vanished. The gold adorning Lisbon's altars was soaked in silent screams. But distance sanitized suffering. In Lisbon, gold arrived purified, transformed into beauty, power, prestige. Its human cost remained invisible to those who wore its glow. As shipments continued, Lisbon's dependence deepened. Rather than building industry or self-sustaining crafts, Portugal let Brazilian gold fuel everything. Foreign luxuries flooded markets: English textiles, Dutch ceramics, Italian silksall, purchased not with Portuguese goods, but with raw treasure. Gold flowed out almost as fast as it arrived, enriching rivals while weakening Portugal's foundations. This created a fragile paradise. As long as Brazilian mines yielded abundantly, Lisbon thrived, but its entire prosperity rested on a single, distant source, vulnerable to exhaustion, rebellion, or fate. Few questioned this fragility during the height of glory. Mines seemed endless. Fleets arrived like clockwork. Confidence soared. Gold also reshaped society itself. New elites emerged overnight, merchants and officials buying titles, estates, influence. Old aristocratic families found themselves competing with upstarts whose fortunes sprang from colonial trade. Social mobility accelerated, but so did tension, jealousy, rivalry. Meanwhile, abundance bred extravagance over prudence. Saving felt unnecessary when gold arrived constantly. Wealth wasn't meant to be stored, was meant to be seen. In Lisbon, brilliance equaled prestige. The brighter the display, the greater the power. For the crown, Brazilian gold was both blessing and temptation. Kings poured fortunes into religious monuments to demonstrate piety and legitimacy. Massive donations flowed to Rome, cementing Portugal's standing in Christendom. Alliances were purchased, ambassadors charmed, influence extended dull with gold. Yet subtle warnings flickered at the edges of awareness. Surface deposits dwindled. Mining grew harder. Enforcement costs climbed. Smuggling spread. But these whispers were drowned by continued abundance. Lisbon had grown accustomed to wealth on a scale few cities ever experience. It believed its fortune was eternal, from first light until long after darkness fell. Lisbon pulsed with relentless motion, a city that seldom slept. Driven by tides, bells, and voices echoing through labyrinthine streets. To walk its avenues was to feel the entire world converging upon one place. This was not merely a European capital, it was a global crossroads, centuries ahead of its time. Everything began at the harbor. The Tagus River, broad and serene near the city, functioned as Lisbon's lifeblood. Ships of every size and origin crowded its shores, massive ocean-going vessels returning from distant continents, coastal traders bringing regional goods, foreign merchantmen flying flags from every European power. Their masts formed a swaying forest of wood and rope against the sky. The sounds overwhelmed the senses. Sailors shouting in Portuguese, Spanish, English, Dutch, and tongues unknown to European ears. Bells tolling arrivals and departures. Dockworkers hammering, hauling, rolling barrels across weathered planks. The air thickened with salt, tar, fish, spices, sugar, tobacco, and human sweat. To stand at these docks was to experience Lisbon in its rawest, most vital form. This harbor energy radiated through every neighborhood. Thousands depended on its rhythm for survival. Dock laborers unloaded sacks of sugar, coffee, cocoa, and spices into riverside warehouses. Porters bent under crushing weights, hauling crates up steep streets. Shipwrights, carpenters, rope makers, and sailmakers worked ceaselessly, repairing vessels battered by ocean storms. Merchants watched everything with hawk-like eyes. Deals struck in minutes, sometimes with a handshake, sometimes with ink-sealed parchment. Money changed hands at dizzying speed. One successful voyage could build a dynasty. One lost ship could erase a family's name. Risk lived hand in hand with opportunity. Beyond the waterfront, the city unfolded like a living maze. Streets twisted, narrow, and steep, centuries of unplanned growth. Sudden alleys opened into sun-drenched plazas or chaotic marketplaces. Lisbon climbed hills relentlessly, forcing residents to navigate endless stairways and slopes. Carts rattled over uneven stones. Foot traffic never ceased. Markets served as the city's social hardware. Its dazzling diversity played out daily. Vendors sold fish pulled from the river at dawn, produce from nearby fields, bread still warm from ovens. Spices from Asia sat beside local olives. Brazilian sugar-sweetened pastries made with European flour. Coffee still exotic elsewhere became familiar here. People of every origin mingled in these spaces. Portuguese peasants bargained loudly. Wealthy citizens sent servants to procure daily necessities. Foreign traders listened intently, ears tuned for profit. Enslaved Africans sold food, water, and trinkets, sometimes keeping a fraction of earnings, often working solely for owners' gain. Lisbon's population was among Europe's most diverse. Enslaved Africans comprised a significant portion, perhaps 1 in 10 residents. They worked as domestic servants, dock laborers, artisans, assistants, street vendors, messengers. Their presence wove through daily life, carrying water, sweeping streets, cooking meals, accompanying nobles through public squares. This diversity extended further. Brazilians, Indians, diplomats, merchants from every corner of the empire passed through regularly. Dozens of languages filled the air daily. Clothing revealed origins, status, occupation. Lisbon was a crossroads where cultures collided, blended, and sometimes clashed. Daily rhythms followed the church's call. Bells marked hour summoning prayer, signaling work shifts, announcing rest. Religious festivals punctuated the calendar with processions, music, incense clouds, and surging crowds. Even the faithless couldn't escape devotion's presence. Churches dominated neighborhoods, doors open from sunrise to sunset. For the wealthy, life centered on comfort and display. Noble families occupied grand townhouses or palaces overlooking the river. Days filled with social calls, estate management, court appearances, religious ceremonies. Servants handled practical matters. Meals became theater featuring imported delicacies that whispered of global reach. The middle classes, merchants, craftsmen, shopkeepers, lived by work and family. Shops opened before dawn. Workshops echoed with hammer strikes and saw blades. Apprentices learned trades passed through generations. Success depended as much on reputation and connections as on skill. Many dreamed of rising through trade wealth alone. For the poor, existence remained precarious. Overcrowded rooms housed entire families. Disease stalked narrow lanes. Irregular work meant constant hunger. Begging flourished near churches and markets. Charity existed, often church-organized, but couldn't erase hardship. Yet Lisbon's streets thrummed with vitality. Street performers captivated crowds with music or acrobatics. Vendors shouted colorful pitches. Children invented games in whatever space they could claim. Arguments flared and faded like summer storms. The city was loud, passionate, unapologetically alive, Coffeehouses and taverns became vital social hubs, especially for men. Here, news from distant lands spread through rumor and conversation. Tales of shipwrecks, wars, discoveries, scandals traveled faster than official dispatches. Lisbon's residents possessed unusual global awareness, their fortunes tied directly to empire's tides. Women's experiences varied sharply by class. Noble women lived relatively secluded lives focused on family, faith, and social presentation. Middle-class women often worked beside husbands in shops or managed complex households. Poor women labored as servants, laundresses, factory hands. Enslaved women endured especially brutal conditions, frequently subjected to exploitation and violence. Health remained a constant battle. Waste flowed through open gutters. Clean water required laborious carrying. Disease spread swiftly through dense quarters. Yet the city endured, driven by necessity and stubborn habit. Life was harsh but familiar. Transportation moved mostly on foot. Carriages belonged to the wealthy. Horses, mules, and donkeys shared streets with pedestrians. Traffic jams clogged market approaches and church entrances. Accidents happened, regularly accepted as urban life's price. Night transformed Lisbon's character. Lanterns lit major thoroughfares, but many lanes stayed dark. Taverns filled with laughter and drink. Music drifted through open windows. Crime rose after sunset, though patrols tried maintaining order. The city felt simultaneously dangerous and electric. What made Lisbon truly unique was how ordinary all this felt to its Poutanarians. Global wealth, foreign faces, exotic goods, they weren't spectacles. They were Tuesday. Children grew up seeing enslaved people, foreign sailors, and imported luxuries as natural parts of existence. This normalization of empire shaped Lisbon's soul. The city never saw itself as peripheral. It saw itself as central, receiving news from Brazil or India as casually as from neighboring villages. Lisbon existed in constant dialogue with distant shores. Yet beneath this vibrancy lurked fragility. Dependence on trade and empire meant any disruption rippled instantly through daily life. A delayed fleet meant unemployment. A poor harvest meant hunger. Disease could sweep through crowded lanes without warning. Still, during its zenith, confidence drowned out fear. Lisbon was busy, brilliant, powerful. Its streets reflected global currents of goods, people, and ideas. Life here was demanding, unequal, often cruel, but also dynamic, unpredictable, charged with possibility. To walk Lisbon's streets was to stand at the world's center, carried forward by health remained a constant battle. Waste flowed through open gutters. Clean water required laborious carrying. Disease spread swiftly through dense quarters. Yet the city endured, driven by necessity and stubborn habit. Life was harsh but familiar. Transportation moved mostly on foot. Carriages belonged to the wealthy. Horses, mules, and donkeys shared streets with pedestrians. Traffic jams clogged market approaches and church entrances. Accidents happened regularly, accepted as urban life's price. Night transformed Lisbon's character. Lanterns lit major thoroughfares, but many lanes stayed dark. Taverns filled with laughter and drink. Music drifted through open windows. Crime rose after sunset, though patrols tried maintaining order. The city felt simultaneously dangerous and electric. What made Lisbon truly unique was how ordinary all this felt to its inhabitants. Global wealth, foreign faces, exotic goods, they weren't spectacles. They were Tuesday. Children grew up seeing enslaved people, foreign sailors, and imported luxuries as natural parts of existence. This normalization of empire shaped Lisbon's soul. The city never saw itself as peripheral. It saw itself as central, receiving news from Brazil or India as casually as from neighboring villages. Lisbon existed in constant dialogue with distant shores. Yet beneath this vibrancy lurked fragility. Dependence on trade and empire meant any disruption rippled instantly through daily life. A delayed fleet meant unemployment. A poor harvest meant hunger. Disease could sweep through crowded lanes without warning. Still, during its zenith, confidence drowned out fear. Lisbon was busy, brilliant, powerful. Its streets reflected global currents of goods, people, and ideas. Life here was demanding, unequal, often cruel, but also dynamic, unpredictable, charged with possibility. To walk Lisbon's streets was to stand at the world's center, carried forward by ships, gold, labor, and unshakable ambition. The city inhaled continent's riches and exhaled influence, culture, power. For those who called it home, this wasn't spectacle. It was simply life in the richest city on earth. At the heart of this golden world stood the royal court, a realm apart from crowded streets, yet utterly dependent on their energy. Power here wasn't subtle. It was designed to be witnessed, admired, feared. Monarchy ruled through spectacle as much as decreed. Nowhere was this truer than in court rituals and the monumental architecture they inspired. The king anchoring this universe was a ruler whose reign became synonymous with staggering ambition and religious devotion. He inherited a kingdom suddenly flooded with Brazilian gold, and ruled as a man convinced such fortune was heaven's endorsement. To João V, Lisbon wasn't merely a capital, it was the stage where Portugal's divine destiny would unfold before God and humanity. Royal authority saturated the city. The court dictated fashion, taste, ceremony, even morality. Nobles lived by strict codes where status measured not just lineage, but proximity to royal favor. To be seen at court, to receive the king's glance, to attend a royal ceremony, these were currencies rivaling gold itself. Royal residences stood as power made stone. Though lacking Versailles age, Lisbon's palaces dazzled with imported marble, intricate woodwork, masterful paintings, and oceans of gold leaf. Every chamber communicated authority through deliberate design. Nothing was accidental. Court life followed rigid choreographies structured around audiences, ceremonies, prayers, entertainments. Even mundane acts like the king dressing or dining became formal spectacles attended by select nobles. These rituals reinforced hierarchies, reminding everyone of their precise place in the cosmic order. Dress became political language. Nobles wore silk, velvet, lace, and embroidery sourced from across the globe. Gold buttons, jeweled buckles, elaborate wigs signaled rank and wealth. Clothing wasn't self-expression, it was status made visible. To dress poorly meant invisibility. To dress extravagantly, entertainment matched this grandeur. Operas, concerts, banquets, theatrical productions filled palace calendars. Musicians and artists were imported from Italy and beyond to elevate Lisbon's cultural prestige. Music echoed through gilded halls, while feasts showcased ingredients harvested from empire's farthest reaches. These weren't diversions, they were declarations of cultural supremacy, yet no expression of royal ambition rivaled religious architecture. Joao V saw himself as Catholicism's champion and poured unimaginable resources into churches, monasteries, and sacred institutions. This devotion culminated in Mafroa construction project of almost mythic scale. Built beyond Lisbon's walls, Mafra fused royal palace, monastery, and basilica into one overwhelming complex. Thousands of laborers toiled for years, funded almost entirely by Brazilian gold. Bells so massive they required special transport. Libraries housing priceless manuscripts. Corridors stretching into seeming infinity. Mafra was engineered to overwhelm, to leave visitors breathless before its scale. For Joao V, Mafra symbolized the sacred marriage of divine will and royal power. It proclaimed that Portugal, though small in size, had been chosen by God and rewarded with empire. Foreign dignitaries stood stunned before its immensity. Some called it sublime. Others warned it signaled dangerous excess. Within Portugal, it sparked both pride and quiet resentment. The court's influence stretched beyond stone and mortar into governance itself. Power centralized around the king and his inner circle. Brazilian gold allowed Joao V to bypass traditional nobles distributing titles, pensions, and favors directly. Loyalty became purchasable. Political stability rested less on institutions than on wealth and personal allegiance. This bred intense competition among courtiers. Factions formed and shifted like desert sands. Alliances broke overnight. A whispered accusation or misplaced word could destroy a lifetime of service. Survival demanded constant vigilance, practiced flattery, perfect caution. Beneath the glittering surface, court life often suffocated. Many nobles lived beyond means, strapped in debt cycles to maintain appearances. Status demanded expenditure. Even as gold flooded Lisbon, it didn't always reach noble households evenly. Appearances had to be preserved at any cost. Beyond palace walls, royal power touched every citizen. Ceremonial processions flooded streets with color and sound. Crown-sponsored religious festivals displayed unity between throne and altar. Soldiers marched in precise formation, a visible reminder of authority. The court also shaped the city's bones. Neighborhoods near royal residences attracted nobles eager to live close to power. Streets widened, squares beautified, fountains erected. Lisbon's landscape molded itself to reflect hierarchy and grandeur. Yet the court existed in uneasy tension with the city it ruled. While nobles feasted on delicacies, laborers fought hunger. While gold leaf covered palace ceilings, poverty festered in shadowed lanes. The court rarely acknowledged this chasm openly. Wealth was interpreted as divine order, inequality as natural law. Foreign observers often noted this contradiction, marveling at Lisbon's splendor while criticizing its neglect of industry and infrastructure. Some warned that dependence on gold and spectacle left Portugal dangerously exposed. These warnings were largely ignored. For Joao V and his circle, the present demanded celebration. The Golden Age was unfolding now, and it was meant to be lived with both hands. Investments flowed into monuments rather than systems, into display rather than resilience. Lisbon's greatness measured in spectacle, not sustainability. Still, the court achieved its central aim. It made Lisbon legendary. Tales of its wealth spread across continents. Artists, musicians, scholars flocked to its light. Diplomats treated Portugal with respect, far exceeding its size. For a time, gold purchased global prestige. Within palace walls, belief in divine favor never wavered. Disasters were interpreted through faith's lens. Success proved righteousness. Failure tested devotion. This worldview fortified confidence, even as quiet warnings accumulated at the edges of awareness. The royal court of Golden Age. Lisbon stood as both peak and paradox of Portuguese power, embodying ambition, faith, and excess in equal measure. It dazzled contemporaries and left monuments still standing today. To witness this court was to see wealth transformed into authority, art and ritual, a world built on gold, sustained by belief, convinced of its own permanence. And for one luminous moment in history, that conviction felt utterly justified. Beneath Lisbon's brilliance lay a darker, more complex reality, one that shaped daily existence as deeply as gold ever could. Wealth didn't soften the city's moral landscape. Instead, it sharpened contrasts and deepened divisions. Faith, fear, and inequality formed an inseparable trinity woven into the very fabric of life. The same gold that gilded altars also purchased souls. The same ships that brought spices also carried human cargo. Lisbon's splendor rested upon foundations of suffering, carefully hidden from view, a truth the city preferred not to name, yet could never fully escape. Invisible structure that governed behavior, belief, and survival. In Golden Age Lisbon, religion was never a private matter. It was the very architecture of existence. The Catholic Church saturated life from cradle to grave, from whispered prayers to public spectacle. Churches loomed over neighborhoods, not just in stone, but in spirit. Bells tolled incessantly, marking hours, summoning the faithful, reminding every soul of heaven's watchful gaze. For most, faith wasn't chosen. It was breathed like air. Lisbon's staggering wealth supercharged this devotion. Gold didn't merely decorate churches, it transformed them into overwhelming theaters of the divine. Altars blazed with gilded saints carved from rare woods and ivory. Ceilings soared into painted heavens, where angels cascaded toward worshippers below. Faith here was visceral, emotional, immersive, a spectacle meant to be felt in the bones as much as believed in the heart. Yet this radiant piety coexisted with a deep, gnawing dread. Lisbon lived in fear of divine retribution. Earthquakes, plagues, fires, disaster was read as God's displeasure. Prosperity dazzled, but it also terrified. Many whispered that such obscene wealth invited punishment. This tension between gratitude and terror pulsed beneath the city's glittering surface. At the heart of this fear stood the Inquisition, silent, omnipresent, absolute. Tasked with guarding religious purity, it wielded power over thought itself. Its agents monitored speech, investigated whispers, punished deviation. Public autos da fe became spectacles of terror-accused souls paraded before crowds, sentenced beneath crucifixes, sometimes burned alive. These ceremonies weren't merely punishment, they were psychological warfare. Attendance was often mandatory. Silence was survival. Obedience was everything. The Inquisition policed more than heresy controlled desire, speech, intimacy. A careless word in a tavern could vanish a family overnight. Trust evaporated. Self-censorship became second nature. In Lisbon, even thoughts learned to hide. Inequality carved the city into stark realms of haves and have-nots. Nobles and merchants floated through lives of silk and spice in riverfront palaces. Meanwhile, the poor crowded into fetid tenements where entire families shared single rooms. Buildings sagged with rot. Fires raced unchecked through timber frames. Disease stalked narrow lanes. Clean water was a luxury. Children died before they could walk. Despite oceans of gold flowing through Lisbon, social mobility remained a fantasy for most. Birth dictated destiny. Education belonged to the privileged. Literacy was a weapon hoarded by the powerful. Knowledge stayed locked behind gilded doors. Enslaved Africans formed the invisible backbone of this glittering society, everywhere yet acknowledged by no one. They scrubbed noble floors, hauled cargo on docks, sold bread in markets, carried nobles through streets in sedan chairs. Their labor powered daily life, yet their humanity was erased. Enslavement wasn't an aberration, it was routine, legal, woven into the city's rhythm. People were bought at auction like furniture, torn from families without ceremony, punished without recourse. Some earned meager wages they could partially keep, but freedom remained a mirage. The psychological toll was crushing. Lives lived under constant threat, dignity stripped bare, suffering ignored by those who profited from it. Lisbon's gold gleamed because of hands it refused to see. Women navigated layered cages of restriction. Noble women lived under suffocating surveillance lives, dictated by family honor and strategic marriages. Public independence was forbidden. Poor women worked out of sheer necessity, washing clothes in icy rivers, selling scraps in markets, scrubbing floors until their hands cracked. Their labor was essential, yet invisible, poorly paid, and rarely respected. Enslaved women endured worst of all bodies, commodified, vulnerable to abuse, with no path to justice. Charity existed, hospitals, orphanages, church alms, but it soothed conscience without challenging injustice. Poverty wasn't seen as failure of society. It was deemed part of God's design. Crime festered in shadowed alleys. Theft, violence, fraud thrived where desperation lived. Policing was erratic. Justice tilted sharply toward the wealthy. Punishments were brutal. Public theater designed to terrify, not rehabilitate. Fear shaped everyone. The poor feared hunger and the lash. The rich feared ruin and divine wrath. All feared the Inquisition's knock at midnight. This shared anxiety bred a culture of caution where reputation was armor. Silence was safety, and appearances were everything. Survival meant knowing your place and never stepping beyond it. Yet, within this rigid world, humanity refused to die. Families clung to one another. Neighbors shared bread in secret. Music spilled from tavern windows. Laughter erupted unexpectedly in market squares. Small joys persisted not because life was kind, but because people refused to surrender their spirits. Lisbon's golden age was never simply about wealth. It was an era of breathtaking contradiction where faith offered comfort, yet bred terror, where gold created splendor, yet deepened injustice, where order was maintained at the cost of freedom. The city's brilliance masked profound suffering. Its devotion concealed systemic cruelty. The richest city on earth was also a city of silence, submission, and staggering imbalance. And while gold could gild altars and finance empires, it could not erase the tensions simmering beneath every cobblestone fragile society bound by belief and fear, unknowingly waiting for the moment that would shatter everything it held sacred. As the century's midpoint approached, Lisbon still glittered with unshakable confidence, but certainty had begun to fray at the edges. To casual eyes, nothing had changed. Ships still crowded the Tagus, churches still blazed with gold. The court still staged ceremonies of dizzying opulence. Yet beneath this familiar sheen, the forces that built Lisbon's fortune were quietly shifting. The city stood unknowingly at history's hinge. Brazilian gold, once an endless river, now showed cracks. The richest surface veins had been stripped bare. Mining plunged deeper, more dangerous, more costly. Production no longer surged with its former ferocity. Smuggling spread as miners and officials pocketed what they could. The crown's share grew harder to enforce. What had felt like an eternal tide now demanded desperate effort to sustain. In Lisbon, these shifts whispered through daily life. Inflation had reshaped existence. Prices stayed punishingly high. Wealth still circulated, but unevenly. Some fortunes swelled obscenely, while others quietly evaporated. The city's total dependence on gold meant even small disruptions sent shockwaves through employment, credit, trade. Yet almost no one believed the Golden Age could end. Generations had known only abundance. Wealth felt as natural as sunrise. Lisbon's identity was built on permanence and beliefs. This deep resist revision. Urban life continued its familiar rhythms. Markets buzzed, taverns filled with gossip and wine. Religious processions wound through streets with practiced ceremony. The court maintained its rituals. Outwardly, the city stood stable, confident, unaware its foundations had grown brittle. Then came the morning that unraveled the world. November 1st, 1755, All Saints' Day. Lisbon awoke as it always had. Churches swelled with worshippers. Candles flickered against gilded altars. Incense curled toward painted heavens. The city breathed prayer. No one sensed the earth gathering its fury beneath them. Without warning, the ground convulsed. Stones screamed as buildings shuddered, cracked, collapsed. Churches, those heavy monuments to divine favor, imploded under their own ornate weight. The shaking refused to stop. Streets split open like wounds. People ran screaming, stumbling over rubble, searching for solid ground that no longer existed. As structures fell, fire erupted, candles toppling onto tapestries, hearths spilling embers onto timber. Within hours, Lisbon burned. Smoke choked the sky. Heat became unbearable. Survivors fled toward the river, believing open water offered salvation. But the earth wasn't finished. The Tagus receded unnaturally. Ships and debris dragged seaward as if by monstrous hands. An eerie silence fell. Then came the wave. A wall of water surged back with apocalyptic force, swallowing the waterfront whole. Ships hurled onto streets like toys. Entire districts vanished beneath churning black water. By day's end, Lisbon lay in ruins. Tens of thousands were dead, palaces and hovels alike reduced to rubble. The churches that symbolized God's blessing now lay in shattered heaps. Gold offered no protection. Piety brought no mercy. The earth had spoken, and Lisbon's certainty shattered with its stones. The psychological devastation cut deeper than physical ruin. For a society that interpreted every event through divine will, the earthquake posed unbearable questions. Why strike on All Saints' Day? Why annihilate the world's most devout, wealthiest city? The belief that Lisbon's prosperity reflected God's favor collapsed as violently as its cathedrals. Faith itself stood wounded. Survival became primal. Corpses littered streets. Food vanished. Disease threatened to feast on the dead. Order teetered on chaos. Fear of looting and rebellion spread like fire. Into this void stepped a new force, cold, decisive, unflinching authority. The Marquis of Pombal seized control with revolutionary pragmatism. While priests called for prayer, Pombal demanded action. Bury the dead and feed the living. This became Lisbon's new creed. Fires were smothered. Bodies hauled away to prevent plague. Price gouging banned. Looters executed without ceremony. The state imposed order with unprecedented force, not through divine mandate, but through sheer will. Rebuilding began before ashes cooled. But Lisbon would not rise as it had been. Medieval warrens of narrow lanes, those chaotic arteries where fire had raced freely, were erased. In their place emerged wide, rational avenues. Open squares breathed between uniform buildings, engineered to withstand tremors. Architecture shed Baroque, excess for Enlightenment, clarity, symmetry over spectacle, function over flourish. The new Lisbon embodied a transformed spirit. Order replacing chaos. Reason replacing ritual. Resilience replacing display. The earthquake did more than destroy stone-it, shattered worldviews. Across Europe, philosophers grappled with Lisbon's suffering. How could a benevolent God permit such horror? The catastrophe became a crucible for modern thought, challenging divine justice, elevating human reason, redefining our relationship with nature. For Portugal, the disaster accelerated changes already stirring. The Golden Age was unmistakably over. Brazilian gold still arrived, but never again with transformative force. Empires shifted. Rivals industrialized. Portugal struggled to adapt. The Church's authority, though intact, faced new scrutiny. The state grew more secular, more centralized. Control replaced spectacle. Efficiency replaced excess. Yet, from ashes and rubble, the city rebuilt not with the same dazzling arrogance, but with hard-won humility. Its streets now told a different story, not of supremacy, but of survival. The legacy of 18th-century Lisbon remains complex, a city of extraordinary wealth, built on global exploitation, fueled by divine certainty, then humbled by forces beyond human control. Its rise and fall remind us that power is fragile, wealth fleeting, and no amount of gold guarantees permanence. Today, echoes of that golden age linger in churches, where gold still gleams, in streets laid out after catastrophe, in stories carried through generations. Lisbon carries its history openly, layered into stone and memory. The richest city on earth learned in a single morning that safety cannot be purchased. Yet, from destruction came renewal. From certainty came wisdom. From excess came restraint. Lisbon's story isn't merely about lost wealth, it's about transformation, a testament to human ambition, vulnerability, and the stubborn will to rebuild when everything falls apart. And in that truth, the spirit of Lisbon's golden age lives on, not in gold, but in the enduring courage of a city that faced the unimaginable and chose to rise again. Even after flames died and dust settled, Lisbon refused silence. The earthquake had flattened streets and claimed tens of thousands, but it could not erase the city's soul or the memory of its glory. Destruction left both void and possibility, canvas where grief, fear, resilience, and ambition intertwined to reshape Lisbon's destiny. For survivors, the city became a paradox, hauntingly familiar, yet utterly transformed. This tension between memory and reality would define Lisbon for generations to come. The immediate aftermath demanded action on an unprecedented scale. The Marquis of Pombal seized command with iron resolve. In a city where faith had always dictated response to tragedy, Pombal insisted on reason, organization, discipline. Bury the dead and feed the living. This mantra became Lisbon's lifeline. Fires were smothered, corpses removed to halt plague, order restored through equal parts compassion and coercion. Looting met swift punishment, yet citizens received support to rebuild homes and livelihoods. This pragmatic response marked a historic turning point. Lisbon could no longer rely on spectacle and divine favor to define itself. It had to endure. Ruined churches taught a brutal lesson. Permanence was illusion. Survival demanded foresight, collective will, and unflinching pragmatism. Reconstruction began immediately, but with revolutionary intent. Medieval alleys that had funneled fire like kindling were replaced by wide, rational avenues. Buildings rose with standardized, earthquake-resistant designs, uniform heights, reinforced walls, flexible foundations. The new city embodied Enlightenment philosophy: order over chaos, utility over ornament, human reason over divine mystery. Architecture shed Baroque extravagance for classical restraint, symmetry, proportion, clarity. Lisbon transformed from a city that dazzled to one that endured. Yet the Golden Age's ghost lingered powerfully. Memories of gilded churches, opulent palaces, and empire-fueled splendor continued shaping identity and ambition. Nobles, merchants, and commoners alike carried images of past grandeur into their dreams for the future. Even in ruins, Lisbon's aura of importance remained intact, merely redirected from display toward resilience. Economic patterns shifted decisively, with Brazilian gold already declining before the quake. Lisbon diversified, investing in domestic crafts, local industries, varied trade networks. Foreign merchants still arrived, but the economy no longer balanced on a single golden thread. This necessary diversification preserved Lisbon's status as a major European port. Despite lost extravagance, social hierarchies proved remarkably durably at the catastrophe, created subtle openings. Skilled artisans, engineers, architects gained unprecedented influence as their expertise became essential to reconstruction. Merchants who navigated post-disaster logistics expanded their reach. The earthquake disrupted old structures just enough to let new talents emerge, while largely preserving existing power arrangements. For ordinary citizens, life became a daily act of adaptation. Families rebuilt under state guidance or within organized neighborhoods. Construction work was plentiful but grueling, dangerous. Markets reopened slowly. Trade resumed. Normalcy returned in fragments, but trauma endured. Survivors carried memories of sudden annihilation, lost loved ones, the terrifying fragility of safety itself. Collective memory became both burden and strength, reinforcing resilience while deepening caution. Religion's role evolved complexly. The church remained powerful, yet the earthquake had shaken traditional interpretations of divine favor. Many still saw catastrophe as divine punishment, but others began questioning why a loving God would inflict such suffering. Lisbon became a crucible for early Enlightenment thought. In Portugal, debating the relationship between human action, natural law, and divine will, religious authority persisted. But now shared space with secular reasoning and scientific inquiry. The arts reflected this transformation loss. Memory, renewal, intertwining. Painters and writers memorialized the earthquake's horror and heroism. Baroque exuberance gave way to restrained classicism, clarity, and moral narrative, replacing sheer spectacle. Music and literature explored fragility, human agency, the limits of earthly power. Cultural production became a dialogue between past grandeur and present reality, a means of reconciling memory with necessity. Education and intellectual life shifted decisively. Institutions focused on science, mathematics, and engineering gained prominence as their expertise proved vital to safer buildings and rational urban planning. Lisbon became a center for practical knowledge, blending classical learning with applied sciences. The disaster catalyzed modernization, fostering a mindset that valued observation, analysis, and rational planning alongside tradition. Internationally, Lisbon's reputation transformed. Once celebrated as Earth's richest city, post-quake Lisbon became renowned for resilience and recovery. Scholars and travelers marveled not at its wealth, but at the efficiency and decisiveness of its rebirth. The narrative of survival added profound dimension to its historical significance, that human ingenuity could confront forces beyond comprehension, yet the Golden Age's memory never faded. That era of staggering wealth, global influence, and Baroque splendor remained a benchmarker symbol of potential. Citizens who witnessed or inherited stories of gilded churches and opulent palaces carried those images into their vision of possibility. Even in ruins, Lisbon never lost its sense of importance. It had merely redefined greatness from display to endurance. This duality, memory versus reality, wealth versus vulnerability, became central to Lisbon's culture. Chronicles circulated celebrating pre-quake splendor while acknowledging excess. Writers and historians meticulously preserved accounts of European visitors who had marveled at glittering streets, merchants who had amassed fortunes, nobles whose wealth seemed eternal. These narratives kept the Golden Age alive even as the city adapted to new conditions. The earthquake and rebuilding reshaped political culture profoundly. Pombal's decisive leadership demonstrated that effective governance could guide recovery and maintain order amid catastrophe. This set precedent for stronger state intervention in urban planning, disaster management, and economic oversight. Power shifted from spectacle to administration survival, requiring not just wealth, but governance capable of directing resources, labor, and knowledge with precision. Socially, Lisbon became a city of sharpened contrasts. Memory of extreme wealth highlighted persistent poverty. Survivors carried heightened awareness of vulnerability, fueling both fear and practical adaptation. Enslaved populations continued providing essential labor, often in rebuilding efforts, reinforcing systemic inequalities, even as skilled workers gained new leverage through indispensable expertise. The physical transformation reshaped urban life practically and psychologically. Wider streets, uniform buildings, open squares, improved safety and circulation. Public spaces became more regulated, reflecting a shift from chaotic spectacle to structured interaction. This wasn't merely architectural, it reshaped social behavior, commerce, civic engagement, reinforcing order while preserving vitality. Culturally, Lisbon integrated the disaster's lessons into a broader understanding of human experience. Art, literature, and music explored loss, resilience, morality, agency. Writers reflected on earthly glory's fragility. Artists depicted destruction and reconstruction, intertwined, emphasizing endurance over opulence. Music evolved beyond courtly ceremony to explore emotional depth, inspired by lived trauma. Over time, Lisbon's golden age, its destruction and rebirth fused into inseparable identity. Memory and history blended into narrative, emphasizing both human achievements, possibilities, and vulnerabilities, inevitability. Citizens and leaders learned to respect natural forces while cultivating systems capable of mitigating risk. The lessons of 1755 proved profound. Wealth alone cannot guarantee survival. Planning, governance, and resilience are equally essential. Lisbon's influence extended far beyond Portugal. Philosophers and scientists across Europe referenced the city in debates about nature, justice, and societal organization. The earthquake became a touchstone for discussions about risk, ethics, and the social contract. Lisbon's experience informed early modern ideas about urban planning, emergency management, and collective responsibility, transcending local history to contribute to European thought itself. Even today, echoes of 18th-century Lisbon resonate powerfully. The Baixa district, rebuilt with wide streets and seismic-resistant structures, stands as enduring monument to resilience. Churches and civic buildings reconstructed after the quake carried both memory and lesson in their stones. Streets and squares tell intertwined stories of ambition, catastrophe, and renewal. The city's identity remains inseparable from these narratives. In reflecting on Lisbon after its greatest catastrophe, we see that true wealth was never measured in gold, ships, or palaces alone. Lasting significance lies in capacity to endure, adapt, and learn. From ruins emerged a society balancing memory with innovation, faith with reason, ambition with humility before natural forces. Lisbon's golden age, though physically ended, lived on in spirit, culture, institutions. Thus, Lisbon's story after catastrophe is not merely survival, is transformation, a redefinition of identity. the richest city on earth, once measured by gold and global reach, came to be measured by resilience, governance, cultural depth. The earthquake marked an ending but also a beginning, a new chapter where Lisbon could honor its past, confront reality, and thrive in ways that mattered as deeply as gold ever had. Lisbon's journey from golden age through disaster to rebirth stands as timeless lesson. Power, wealth, and splendor are fleeting. Human ingenuity, social cohesion, and the will to rebuild define enduring legacy. History isn't merely what we construct or accumulate, it's what we endure, remember, and transform into future possibility. In this truth, Lisbon's spirit remains eternal, a testament to human ambition, fragility, and the extraordinary capacity to rise again after everything falls apart.